Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today you are tuning into my segment, Spell It Out, Magic, Reflections, and Shadows, where I pick a topic and run with it. Today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about palmistry, and I say a little bit because it's a huge topic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey to study and learn it, give you some tips on reading your own palms, and a little bit of history as well. But before we get started, Michael has a few important announcements.
Hi, everybody, and sorry that we missed out with Jason last week. Unfortunately, our motherboard died in our computer at the last second, and by the time we ran to Best Buy and get a new one and rebuild the computer, we were well past our show time. So we're going to have him back in September, on September 14th. So those of you who are looking forward to him, put it on your calendars. We've got some great shows coming up in August. We have Brad Cronin, the astrologer, next week. He'll be looking at the Pluto return and how that affects the U.S., we have our good friend Dan Moore, the Kabbalist, coming back on the 17th. And then a new guest, a pagan friend of ours, Renee Starr, on the 24th. So all kinds of occult and astrology kind of stuff coming up this month, which should be a lot of fun. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It helps us cover some of our costs and things like new motherboards, which come up every now and again. And certainly subscribe to our channel and our newsletter so we can let you guys know what's going on. So don't want to take up too much more time. Oh, and in September, I will be doing another round of tarot classes. If those of you who are interested in learning the tarot, especially from a Kabbalistic point of view, get a hold of me and through the website and book your spot. And we'll keep it to about 10 people or less. So I like to keep it a small group. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great, Michael. And some of you may know we were going to have Jason on today, but unfortunately he could not make it at the last minute. So I've noticed a few obstacles to our magical guests, and I'm not sure if it's the ghosts who are jealous because we're not covering them right now or not. But anyway, we're really looking forward to having him at some time, and say a little prayer for us with all of our magical guests. So when I wanted to start with a quote by Aristotle about palmistry, which I found years ago. And he wrote, "Palmistry is a judgment made of the conditions, inclinations, and fortunes of men and women from the various lines and characters which nature has imprinted in the hands, and which are almost as various as the hands that have them." He wrote that in 350 BC. And as I recall, one of his students read his palm, and it wasn't particularly favorable, evidently. And he said something like he had a lot to overcome. And that's at least what I read. I don't know if that's true or not. So a little bit just about how old it is. And some of this is the legends around it, but it definitely is very old in terms of evidence. But early legends attribute palmistry to Hermes. And some of the earliest practitioners were said to be the Chaldean magicians, the priests of Isis in Egypt, and the Brahmins in India. India is really fascinating because they have kept palm prints for thousands of years, and there's still a lot that a lot of people haven't seen. It's very spiritual, the palmistry in India, and it's often along with face reading and your chart. So ideally, if you were studying Indian palmistry, you'd want to know the chart of the person, which it would be actually very ideal, even Western palmistry. But they have some of the most vast knowledge of palmistry. And there's also Chinese palmistry, which I haven't been able to really study yet. There's so many systems, but I can imagine they might have a lot of history as well. It's a little bit of a different system. Anyway, it was very popular in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the Age of reason put a bit of a damper on it, but there was renewed interest in the late 1800s. That was around the same time as all, of course, Blavatsky and the Golden Dawn. So it was all, in a way tied together. And of course, now it is very popular. In fact, it's so popular that when I first started studying palmistry, of course, there was no YouTube. And now there's some actually really good free instructional classes on palmistry. If you look on YouTube, you'll see there's actually quite a bit. And we'll talk a little bit about, how to teach yourself palmistry, because I am a self-taught palmist. And I wanted to first sort of say why I got interested in palmistry. Like many things we all get interested in, it was because of a couple people that read my palm. And the first one that I recollect, I was living in New York City with this lovely friend of mine, Marina, and we would go to different spiritual groups, and we had befriended this older gay man. He was, maybe in his 60s, and we were all having coffee together one day, and he wanted to read our palms, and he was not a palmist for a living, but he knew palmistry. And so he read my palm, and he read something so specific about when I was a young girl that it was really impressive, but also very healing. And it had to do with, he said as a young girl, I had really fallen in love and had a boyfriend. And in his own way, he said that I'd had a childhood love and I had been really hurt. And it's true. I had. I remember him, and I remember, what happened. He went through a real tragedy with his father being killed, and how much I felt, close to him, even though I was a little girl. And it made me realize that children can have deep loves and never sort of, poo-poo that, because I didn't really realize that it stuck with me until he said that. And so it was very healing and also nice to acknowledge. And then I had another psychic I met, and she was quite clairvoyant, and she had mentioned that I might have to have a hysterectomy in my life based on my palm. And again, she wasn't really a palm reader. She read a little bit about the palms. And it's true that I did have a hysterectomy years later, and I don't think it was one of those things that, she kind of gave me the idea. I do think I had a weakness there that went on for about a decade. And so it almost made me feel okay about it, when I finally decided to do it. So I got interested in the fact that they could just see that in my hand. There's also something very intimate about reading a person's hands because it's part of them. And so that was originally how I got interested in it. But it was really years later that I decided to start to learn it. And I looked at the time, I think it was probably around the 2000, or maybe a little bit earlier, that I started getting interested in. It wasn't really too long after the tarot. And I really could not find a palm teacher. I did try. I eventually found one man, but basically he was just a person that really liked a particular palmist, a particular book. I think it was Benham, and I'd already read that book. So it wasn't really like someone that had integrated a lot of thought and theory. And so I just decided to delve in on my own. And it seemed like I had a bit of a knack with it from the very beginning, because one of the things that if you do palms for people, they immediately give you feedback. It's one of those things you don't even have to ask. And it's really, really helpful to see if you're on the right track. But I think the first thing I would say is that it's kind of cool just to get to know your own palm. And the way to do that is obviously by looking at it and looking at it frequently. The schools that I admire and follow want you to look at both palms. And again, most of what I've learned is that it's your active dominant hand that you read for the moment, and your passive hand would be where you're coming from, and sometimes past lives and your traits that you may or may not have changed in the other hand. So of course, if you're right-handed, the active hand is the right hand. If you're left-handed, it's the left hand that's the active hand. And you'll see a lot of people read just one palm, which honestly I think is more of a time-saving thing, because one of the most overwhelming things about palmistry is the amount of knowledge. So when you go to study palmistry, you can study the shape of the hands, the fingers, the fingerprints, ridges, lines. Lines are maybe where people start, because in some ways it's easier to actually just start with the lines. So most palm books will want you to look at the shape of the hand, which is very challenging in the beginning. And one of the things I would advise is to try and find a system with the shape that's not too complicated. So there's different books that say there's 7 shapes of the palms, or try to maybe stay with the elements and keep it really basic. And in fact, most of the time, I think if you're starting, it's good to start with a smaller book. Though some people like meaty books and they'll jump right in, but there are shorter books that are written by palmists too that cover really good basic material that will give you a good start. But the best thing to do is honestly just keep looking at hands and look at your friends' hands. Just get curious about what you see and what also impresses you, because one of the things that makes palmistry unique will be how you decide to approach the palm, and also maybe what interests you, very similar to astrology. So you might be interested, for instance, in only hand analysis, which stays away from predictive work. And that you'll look at the character of the person and sort of what they might be good at and what their weaknesses are. That is a very valid and very, respected way of looking at the palm. There is also more the fortune-telling, gypsy-style, psychic palmistry, which I do a little bit of because I like predictive work. But the reason I like it in the palmistry especially is you will learn that the lines can change. And that is something that is also really unique to palmistry. Let's say, you want to see if you're using some of your ability to speak or communicate represented by a Mercury line on your inactive hand. You would then see it on the active hand if you were using it. And that is what's one of the most interesting and fascinating things I have found to be very true about palmistry, that the lines can change, they can diminish, they can strengthen. I've had more than one occasion where I have seen it. Seeing it for yourself is probably much more impressive because, as you know, anyone could write a book and say anything they want. But, if you talk to anyone that's done any kind of palmistry for even a couple years, they'll say, no, this is very true. That the lines, and they don't have to change necessarily significantly, but they definitely can. For instance, I remember when I used to, more regularly look at Michael's hand, my husband, and when he started doing more public speaking, he grew a Mercury line on his hand, and he didn't have that line before because I knew his hand well. But I want to backtrack a little about, however, one of the things you ought to do if you're reading palmistry or you just want to learn to read your own palmistry is you really want to capture the palms. And this is another challenging thing once you start to do palmistry for others, because really it is important for so many reasons to capture the palm. Now, it used to be when I started, largely we would ink it, and I still like the inked method. It's a lot of fun. It creates a beautiful print that is almost like art. People love to see their hand printed in ink. And there are some things you can tell a little better with the inked palm print. But now we have, of course, great cameras, and we have camera phones, so you can even do it on the sly. You can take a picture. So what I did recently is I took a picture of the person that came for the palmistry, and then I could look it on the screen while I'm talking to the person so that they don't have to just sit there with their hands out, getting tired. And also so I can zone in or zoom in onto the small details. So I think, ideally, if you wanted to keep track of your own palm, I would suggest both, that you would take the time to ink your palms, and then you want to take photos, perhaps annually. You might not have to do more than one photo, because once you get to know your palm, you'll be able to recognize changes. You just kind of look at it now and then and say, hey, what's up with my palm, And I definitely think you can learn to read your palm, though I'm sure you might get some things that stump you. Most everybody does, because palmistry has so many unique, tiny, important lines and things that are unusual. Sometimes I see something that I've never seen before, and even in a book. So I would take the time to do it. It's a lot of fun. And then, make sure you date it and you keep it somewhere where you can find it. You want to, when you take the pictures, you're going to want to take pictures of the front, the back, if possible, the sides. You can find some really good examples of how to photograph palms. And one of my favorite books for that is by Ellen Goldberg and Dorian Bergen, The Art and Science of Handreading. And they learned from one of the students of Benham. So the book is also really good, but they have some of the best pictures of palms, and particularly how you can determine the mounts that I've ever seen in any book. So you want to maybe take a look at that. You can, of course, look online, but this will give you an idea when you're taking pictures what you're looking for. And then another thing that a lot of palmists do, and I've started doing, is you make like a little chart, and you make little notes of all the different areas that you're going to cover, like a little sheet. And you can find these sometimes in books as well, or you can make your own. And again, this is to help you become a more thorough palmist. And that's one of the struggles I've had, because when I first started, I learned probably backwards when I think about it. I learned with the lines, and most palm books teach you to look at the shape of the hands and the fingers, the texture, the color, and then eventually you get to the mounts and the lines. But I don't think that was necessarily a wrong thing, because there are some things about the lines that you can tell quickly. And so for like short readings at a party, you can do, these little short readings and not get into in depth with the palm. And I think it's fine, because one of the things that people like is they really like it if you talk about them. But I think if you get anything correct from the palm, it sort of impresses anyone. Impressed me when someone got correct, because they wonder, well, where did they get that from, and how is this possible? And you can get some very specific things, even with simple things with palmistry, that seem to be accurate, So you can, for short readings, maybe you don't need to take the pictures, but the more deep you study the palm, particularly your own, similar to astrology, the more insight you're going to get, and the more detail, including ways to figure out timing in palmistry, which actually is quite meticulous. Most of the methods used that are not psychic in nature use the timing. They divide it up according to sort of the mount. So you almost have to literally draw on the hand and look at the intersection of certain lines for timing. And again, you'll find that in some of the books. And there are a couple different versions, but they're pretty consistent. I would say the only thing about timing that's changed is people are living longer, so you have to kind of adapt that. But from what I can tell, roughly speaking, the way the palm is timed is fairly accurate. There's an art to interpreting palmistry for sure. And I know that there are some people that think you can just get impressions from the hand, and I think that that's all good and well, but that really isn't palmistry. Palmistry deserves study. It deserves the attention to learning from it, because that's what it really is. And there's so many actually really good books on palmistry that you can add to your library. And I've got probably at least 25, and I've certainly read at least half of those books. And there's always something new I find, a new angle, and there's also consistencies. So it is a lot of fun, very similar to astrology that way too. And I totally encourage you to certainly use intuition with your looking at the palm. So for instance, your intuition might tell you, oh, I'm really drawn to this line for some reason, and something stands out on the palm. And I would say I do get some psychic impressions from the palm, but honestly, I've gotten things that sound psychic by the fact that I've actually learned palmistry, but people don't know it. So there's a lot of memorization with palmistry. You'll want to be a person that likes detail. But again, you don't have to know everything. It's one of those things, like, for instance, I don't really put in the fingerprints into my interpretations, even though it's a fascinating aspect to palmistry. So I largely work with the shapes of the fingers, the hand, the texture, the color, and of course the lines. And that's tons and tons of material to work with. And of course, your own palm's a different story, because we all know we love to delve into finding out about ourselves. You can say, oh, let me go look at, do I have a whorl on my finger or not, you know? And it is a lot of fun. It is. There can be some aspects of palmistry that can seem kind of scary, like, you know, accidents and illness. And, you know, you're going to have to learn to take that with a grain of salt. For instance, most palmists will tell you that the length of the lifeline, which is the line that runs around the thumb, is not an indication of a short life. However, if you do find that there are books like that, let me give you some evidence that will counter it. I remember reading for a man who had a very long, clear, beautiful lifeline. And he got very sick. I forget what was the first thing, cancer, I think, in his 60s, recovered from that. And then he had something with his brain a couple years later, and he eventually died. And his lifeline was very long. Now, what it did seem to indicate was he did have a strong constitution. Like, he fought back on at least 2 major illnesses. And that seemed to be, his vitality was stronger than normal. And perhaps, you know, if he was around today, it would have been a different story because cancer is being treated more effectively. So anyway, it did indicate that he was going to have a long life. And I've seen, you know, again, I just kind of remembered that thinking like, oh, that's kind of odd. And then not really, because that's not what it means, really, is the length of the lifeline. So a lot of palmistry you're going to find is really about experience, about looking at the palms, about your own understanding, hopefully deepening with time. I think it's a lot of fun to look at your own hands and to try to get to know them. So one of the things you want to do when you're getting to know your hands is to look at them early in the morning when you wake up, and definitely in natural light if you can, because that's going to help you with the color of the hand. And you'll notice, like, for one thing, some lines will get a little more like pronounced by the end of the day. So for instance, when I look at my hands in the morning, I have a lot of little lines coming out from the mount of Venus crossing my lifeline towards the end of the day sometimes, but in the morning they have receded back. And so I find that fascinating. I've also noticed for myself, the Mercury line can represent health, your health in some cases, particular digestive and nervous system. And when I'm having some issues, it turns red. And so once you get to know your hand, you'll sort of see signs that, oh, maybe I should be taking care of this or working on that, or look, I've improved that. And it's just another way of getting to know yourself, and it's really a lot of fun. The other thing I like to do is when I'm watching TV, if an actor or someone puts their hands up, I'll freeze it and I'll see if I can see anything, the shape of the hand. You know, Donald Trump with his little hands, that means something. You know, little-handed people can be impatient, not good with detail. And so there are things you can learn. And there's also some wonderful handprints that have been taken over the years, not just by palmists, but you'll see it in some, I think, art worlds. For instance, I have found one of my favorites is the palm print of Amelia Earhart. And she has a really big lunar mount and Venus mount, looks really kind of masculine in her hand. It's pretty cool. And I've seen Einstein's palm print, Hitler's is out there. So you can start to look at them and kind of get a sense of where that character comes from, and if you agree with it or not. So it's really a lot of fun. But like I said, it can be a little overwhelming. So I would say if you want to start with simple things, what you would do is start with maybe some, looking at the basic hand shape, and then perhaps some of the lines, touching it. You want to see the texture. But, just kind of play around with it. You're going to get your own feeling about what's important to you and your own thoughts about, what the shapes mean in reality and what the lines mean. I see the hand as sort of like the mounts are kind of like mountains, and the lines are rivers going through the mountains. And then also sometimes you can just kind of glance at a hand and sort of see that there's a lot going on or there's not a lot going on. And that itself means something. So you can, do some really simple things, and it's really actually quite effective with palmistry. Other authors, there's a lot of authors I would totally recommend. In fact, palmistry is one of the few areas where most of the books I've read are really pretty good, and they differ. And so the ones I've really enjoyed, one was books by Elizabeth Daniel Squires, and she was recommended to me by Mad George, and he was a palmist on Venice Beach, and he was a great palmist, and he was just a character. And so he would, sit out there and read palms, and really I had my palm read by him, and he was really quite an icon in Venice Beach on the oceanfront boardwalk. And he recommended her when I asked him. And then, of course, there's Chiro. I like Richard Webster's books. And there's this Vernon Mahabal, Mahabal. And he has these really good short books that if you want to just learn something quickly, but you want to have a refresher, and they're really nicely designed. I love them. And so I really recommend him too. And then of course I recommended earlier The Art and Science of Handreading by Ellen Goldberg and Dorian Bergen. So those are just a few to get you started. Definitely you want to study palmistry, though. You'll just get so much more out of it for yourself if you want to do it for other people. It's been I really have enjoyed reading people's palms, and sometimes it really has affected their lives in ways I didn't expect. I remember once reading for a young woman, and I had looked at her lifeline, and sometimes if a lifeline is shortening as it progresses down the hand, what I have noticed is their vitality changes. And she was quite young, and so I said, if you keep going the way you're going in your 40s, you're going to have to change how you push yourself and how you approach life. And she was, I just thought I'll just tell her that now, and she can do what she wants with it. So anyway, she ended up deciding to get some blood tests done. I don't know why. She was very fit. She ran marathons, but she did work a lot. And she already had a tendency to high cholesterol. So I was impressed, and I guess she didn't like that idea that, well, I don't want to run out of energy. So she started changing her diet and doing some things. And again, she wasn't ill, had no illness. And so she was nipping it in the bud. I have seen some amazing changes, particularly on the lifeline for the better. I once read a palm of someone who had a really strong lifeline on her active right hand and a very worn, tattered looking broken lifeline on her left hand. And I just looked at her. I'd never seen quite a difference in lines before between two hands. And I said, what did you do to improve your health? And she says, you have no idea. And she said, I worked really, really, really hard. And so that really stuck with me, that she had changed it so dramatically that even I could not miss the fact. So you can, see that with the heart line, the headline, sometimes the mounts. I find that the lines are maybe easier to read, the changes, but there are even changes sometimes in the shape of the hand. They can be a little subtle. I've seen that in books mostly, not so much from my own experience. But I would definitely, when it comes to the idea of fortune telling, personally, I would stay away from people that sort of are adamant about your future with palmistry, because as you know from today, the lines can change, and they absolutely can change. And that I am 100% sure about it. So have fun with it. If nothing else, look at your palms a little bit, get to know yourself that way. It's very intimate. People love it for that reason. Maybe, you can also, if you don't want to read, like I said, there's some really good YouTube people that you can see have in-depth things on the palm, but stay away from people that tend to be adamant about this is what it means. And because, palmistry is like astrology. There's a little bit of different views on some things, though there should be some consistency, where, for instance, the headline is, where the heart line is, generally what the mounts mean. If you know some astrology, it's going to help you because there are correlations with palmistry and astrology. But anyway, I just wanted to introduce you to one of my other loves, which is palmistry. And I hope this gets you started on your journey if you have not had your palms read, or if you want to learn more to read palms for others. But thank you for listening, and tune in next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a great week.